As you're thinking about your questions, easy ones are good too. You don't have to give hard questions. Sorry, she's muted. All right. My name is Gloria Monteen, and I have written my thesis on the degradation of language. Words matter. The degradation and bastardization of language is the cause for the disintegration and decomposition within culture. As language is lost, so is a part of human connection with Christ, since men are no longer able to understand their faith. This means that the degradation must be stopped and language must be preserved. The purpose of this thesis is to dive deeper into the loss of language. Beginning with other languages that have faced a grave fate, this will compare the similarities to these languages and modern languages, notably English. This is followed by methods to know whether or not there is a problem, and finally, the solution for that problem. Quote, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world," end quote. A language defines its people, affects their thinking, and reflects their culture. Mark Lipperman, a linguistics professor at the University of Pennsylvania, has this to say with regards to language change. Quote, "Generation by generation, pronunciations evolve. New words are borrowed or invented. The meanings of old words drift, and morphology develops or decays. The rate of change varies, but whether the changes are faster or slower, they build up until the mother tongue becomes arbitrarily distant and different. After 1,000 years, the original and new languages will not be mutually intelligible. After 10,000 years, the relationship will be essentially indistinguishable from chance relationships between historically unrelated languages," end quote. Languages such as Latin, French, and English show a distinct change over the eras of their history. Just as time-traveling legionnaires could have been frustrated by modern Italian or French because they spoke Latin, so too would a modern English speaker have been at his wit's end if asked to speak to an Old English speaker. As George Orwell puts it in his book, 1984, quote, "Has it ever occurred to you that by the year 2050, at the very latest, not a single human being will be alive who could understand such a conversation as we are having now?" This book was only written in 1948. Like a wagon, language is drawn behind the horse of culture. Could one man pull it by himself? Perhaps, but only if the horse slowed down long enough to be unhinged. But the same horse is running so fast that if he runs over a cliff, the wagon will fall as well. The breaking of language is the sound of the wagon's crash. Modern languages, too, show a correlation between language and culture. For example, French is a language of beauty that highlights the reaction between male and female, as in le and la. It emphasizes sound, so too its culture emphasizes beautiful things. American English especially is a melting pot of many languages, as the cultures of America have blended with immigration and new ethnicities. This has caused English to become a very confusing means of communication due to its multitude of rules being easily broken. Is this a melting pot, or is it a bastardization of other tongues to dress them up together and call it one? It is easiest to see this change in the names of towns. In Illinois, there are two towns most obviously mispronunciation of other languages. Versailles is the royal palace in France. In Illinois, it is pronounced with Midwestern distinctiveness, Versailles. Another example comes from Spanish. While in Spanish, a J is pronounced as an English H, resulting in San Jose, the English alternative sounds more like San Jose. A recent Indonesian study was conducted to ascertain the true effects of slang use in youth. Quote, "The study revealed that 80% of frequent slang users struggled with formal language in academic settings, while 65% reported diminished essay writing abilities. Additionally, 70% identified slang as integral to their social identity, though 60% experienced communication difficulties with older generations. Social media platforms significantly influenced slang adoption, with 90% of respondents regularly using slang on Instagram and TikTok," end quote. In a world rampant with technology and worldwide internet culture, these staggering numbers can reasonably apply to all youth, including Americans. This means that the next generation are being set up for lives of miscommunication and struggle, and can absolutely define that there is a problem. The loss of words is a tragedy. As English changes more and more over the centuries, this will become clearer than it already is. No longer are the beautiful words of Beowulf applicable. Even the letters have been lost from that time. The clear pronunciation of the Arthurian era has been lost to silent letters and diphthongs. What is left is a language so butchered so as to have multiple meanings for different words and to have meanings with no words left. As Mark Twain said, quote, "The difference between the almost right word and the right word is the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning," end quote. English is losing its lightning, and bugs are a poor substitute. As previously stated, languages go through cycles of change, rise, and fall. Upon initial inspection, this may not seem like a problem. Why should we worry? In the words of Orwell, quote, "Our civilization is decadent, and our language, so the argument runs, must inevitably share in the general collapse. It follows that any struggle against the abuse of language is a sentimental archaism, like preferring candles to electric light or hansom cabs to airplanes," end quote. But the integrity of a language is more than personal preference. The integrity of language is the essential catalyst of human thriving. Without it, humanity loses its true connection to history, which is the foundation of modern progress, interpersonal relations, and individual identity. Thus it stands. This is a clear problem in the world. Without linguistic clarity among people, there are bound to be miscommunications and misunderstandings. This will hurt the community, since people will have different understandings of the same thing. Further language shortening leads to words with more than one meaning that merely contribute to the problem. For example, words such as love are being ambiguified from their Greek complexities. Where people used to define love between agape, God's love of man, phileo, familial love, and eros, romantic love, English is now stuck with love, love, and love, with very little to discern between them, short of a lengthy explanation of connection or emphasized repetition. An example of this is the use of 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7. The love verse, as it is commonly called, is used often in the context of romantic love, or eros. How are modern English speakers to know that this is translated from the word agape, which is the love that God has for men? The Greek depth of meaning has been lost, hindering communication. If English is allowed to be lost, or if the degradation of language cannot be slowed or stopped altogether, the world will continue this vicious and sad cycle of flourishing, degradation, and extinction. As has been seen in historical cultures such as Egypt, Greece, and Rome, the rise and fall of the country aligns itself with the rise and fall of its culture and language. America, too, will fall if measures are not taken to prevent the loss of good words. Words that are precise and beautiful, originating in the formation of our culture. How is this issue then resolved? The way to prevent the deterioration of language is the preservation of that language. There are several ways to preserve a language, namely the preservation and study of good literature, and the study of teaching of these languages, and the discouraging of the problems that have previously been discussed, such as slang and word abbreviation. But how can this standard be upheld? In school, when the teacher brings out the geometry textbook, she does not say, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Deal with it. Or at least a good teacher doesn't. She explains how this formula is derived, who Pythagoras was, and the uses of the theorem. Why is this not the case with spelling or vocabulary? Why does the teacher not explain that I came before E because the French influenced the English? Why is it not discussed that the letter C makes so many sounds, but the letter B cannot? This is a failing in the educational system, and it does not seem to be observed by any school system. Children are taught mnemonics, which is a device such as a pattern of letters, ideas, or associations that assists in memorizing something, to memorize rules for one of the worst languages for rule breaking. Beyond early lessons, schools must commit to attention and continuation of grammar instruction. In order to be master of something, one must produce it. Instead of making school easier on students by removing writing requirements, it is better for a student to be trained in good writing technique and to be evaluated fairly so that he may be correct. Furthermore, the use of AI and similar technologies must be guarded against, since these devices' editing and even composition of student assignments is also harmful to a student's learning process since he is not mastering language for himself. Writing must be more than drudgery, and students must learn that it is connected to their past civilization and their future culture. Modern English must stop flexing the laws of grammar, verbing nouns and adjectivizing nouns to sound like the opposite of what they are. Stop making phrases such as shut up and no way able to be used to beg continuance. This is a battle that everyone must wage. Orwell shows that these problems must be discouraged. This can only be done with specific personal habits. He further includes a list of rules in order to facilitate this. Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. Never use a long word where a short one will do. If it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. Never use the passive when you can use the active. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. Break any of these rules sooner than saying anything outright barbarous. In addition to these rules, there are some practical modern activities. Instead of using AI-generated notes to study, take notes by hand. This will better cement the knowledge through the process of actually working to synthesize information into studyable bits, forcing practice in spelling and grammar. Instead of scrolling endlessly on social media, prioritize an excellent book. Show publishers that good works that use language well are worthy of the time it takes to read them. This will encourage others to appreciate literature and language beyond just the mind of one person. Finally, instead of texting shorthand messages, brace yourselves, write a well-thought-out letter. Or, oh the horror, have a meaningful conversation. This does not only apply to students or youth, but to all generations. A people interested in the continuance and preservation of its own language is a culture that represents the best humanity has to offer. When words are lost, so is understanding. The degradation and bastardization of language is the cause for the disintegration and decomposition within culture. As language is lost, so is a part of human connection with Christ, since men are no longer able to understand even their faith. This means that the degradation must be stopped, and language must be preserved. The saying goes, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me." This is not true. Here's a different mantra. Words matter. Consider words before they are spoken, and continue to consider them after. Do not change definition simply for convenience sake. Rather, make an effort to find the correct word for the intended meaning. In this virtual world, there is no excuse for a poorly written message. There's no risk of time or editing. In this world where sending a message takes so little time, take the time that has been made up, spend it to say what is meant and mean what is said. After all, the only thing to tell future generations of man's existence will be words on a stone. Make them matter. Thank you. Any questions?
I have some questions, but I don't want to monopolize the question. I'll start. I was intrigued by that what Orwell said. So if instead of using a long word, try to use a short one. And short words, my understanding, is actually one of the powerful aspects of the English language. The English language has just really powerful short words. Some of our best writers employ them very well.
Yes.
It seems to me that there might be an argument for one of the powers of the English language that we could try to preserve is actually bringing in words from other languages that do things better than English words. Correct. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
So one of my observations while doing research for this came from some interesting sources. Notably, C.S. Lewis discusses in part of Mere Christianity, I believe it was, about words that have been, their original meaning has been changed. And as I researched that, he uses the specific word of gentleman. Gentleman used to mean a landed noble who was perceived to act chivalrously because that was how the time worked. So eventually it evolved to where a gentleman now means someone who is kind or someone who holds a door or acts with chivalry. We don't usually use it in the sense that a gentleman owns land and works for the king. I found a lot of other words from history, historical Old English, that have similar evolution and disappearance. There are a lot of words which I can't memorize and pronounce because they are in older English than I speak. But those words could make a resurgence if we made the effort to learn them, which I am doing. I think that Orwell speaks about those very powerful short words in in replacement of those long phrases that carry on endlessly when you can use a word instead that makes more sense. Did that answer your question?
Not exactly, because I'm interested in the incorporation of words from other languages into English.
Right.
So you're talking about Old English there, but I'm thinking more about, because we are a melting pot, especially and I'm trying to think of a good example.
Rendezvous.
There you go, Mrs. Monteen. Yeah. So this is a word that has been incorporated in English that has some meaning that maybe was not. It's a little bit more than just a meeting, right? It has nuances that aren't in an English word, but we've actually brought it in from another language, and that actually enhances English. And the preservation of those words is important too.
So as I have been reading in my studies and in my personal belief, it actually does not enhance English. It pulls away from English. We're no longer speaking English when we say that word. We're speaking French, I believe, French. So using that word rendezvous, it's very hard for someone who doesn't know background to define that word. Like if you were to say rendezvous to a kindergartner, they probably don't understand that. And I think that it's a lot harder for us to learn English or to teach English when so many of our words have outside influence and outside meaning, especially like the pronunciation. Like, have you ever seen rendezvous spelled? It's not how it sounds. Mm-hmm. I consider that a devolution of English because it adds confusion to a language where words such as gathering or meeting still suffice. And words that historically have been used, once again, I don't have a list of them, there are words in Old English that were used in Beowulf to define a gathering that has a same or similar meaning to rendezvous, but we no longer use it because rendezvous has replaced it. Do you have more questions?
I have more questions.
I don't think anybody else is gonna.
Okay. So my another question I have is one of the things that it seems to me is that as we get much more lazy and ignorant about what words mean and their uses, that very quickly opens the door much more for manipulation.
Yes.
We can be manipulated.
Absolutely.
by use of these words. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Absolutely. Yes. I don't want to give away part of Wes's speech. If you think about Rome and what happened as Rome fell, there was a lot of word twisting and word confusion that happened among the politicians. Like the politicians would help each other, or they'd give each other donations, all of course in Latin equivalent, but I'm not that far in Latin yet, guys. It happens a lot even today when you see big corporations that are donating to these political campaigns, etc. And a lot of them are, of course, but donation it's a giving. It's a gift. And a lot of times it's no longer used as a gift. It's more used as a bribe, which is one of those word changes, word shifts that I mentioned. When you take a word and you throw a couple more meanings at it. Donation versus bribe is one of those examples.
Gloria, could you talk to the part in your thesis where you discuss identity and how the harm that has been placed on modern identity from the shifting of language?
Yeah, of course.
I think that might answer some of what Dr. LaFont was asking.
Yeah, so in modern English, it's one of the obvious ones is it's getting harder and harder to define a person or a gender. But another one is it's harder and harder to define a Christian. If we take the word Christian and we study its original connotation, it just meant little Christ, which was someone who followed Christ, acted like Christ. But if you talk to people in a setting where they are not Christian or they have been treated ill by a Christian, that word takes on a negative connotation where they twist it to mean a do-gooder or hypocrite. Even sometimes I have talked to people who believe that Christians portray themselves differently than they are meant to as little Christs. And I think that because we've lost the definition of the original word being little Christ, it's harder to present yourself as a Christian, have the identity of a Christian, when Christian has all these different connotations, instead knowing that the definition is little Christ, that you are to be a reflection of him. It's a lot easier to identify yourself as a Christian than someone who is a do-gooder or someone who puts on a facade of correctness. So that's just one example of an identity crisis. You could also look at descriptive words such as beautiful or smart that have also taken those meanings, especially culture has taken those meanings and said, oh, everyone's beautiful in their own way. Well, I disagree. I don't think that everyone in the world is beautiful per se, physically. I think that everyone has aspects that make them lovable. And I think that it's important to love everyone, regardless of how they look. But taking a word such as beautiful and applying it to everyone and letting it have different ranges, even having different degrees of beauty with the same word, it's even more confusing and once again hinders communication, because if a butterfly is beautiful and a waterfall is beautiful and God is beautiful, the word completely loses its meaning.
Sorry, were you done?
Yeah.
Okay. I really like what, maybe this is more of I like what you brought up about explaining the English language to younger students and how that's, what I've always explained to my kids as well, English just breaks all the rules.
Right.
That's the only answer I have. Did you have other thoughts and ideas about how to help like younger students, or how to teach English in ways at younger ages that would really help students understand or focus more on the English language?
Absolutely, yeah. So I don't know if it was as clear as I meant it to be, but as I mentioned, the damage is already done. We already have all these different languages infiltrating their little fingers into English. We already have responde, voici, replay, and all that fun stuff. But we also have more simple things like the I before E rule that I mentioned. That comes from French. And if you explain that in French, it sounds like this, which I don't have the pronunciation for it. I should have heard better for that. If you think about it in context of spelling certain words in English, like friend, or other I before E rule breakers, like neighbor or slay, it makes sense in the context of having those other languages infiltrating. Like I remember learning these different rules and then all the rule breakers, and it was incredibly confusing. But if you think about it in the context of there were other languages at play, and then you learn that those different influences attach to the other words, like neighbor comes from, can't think of the word right now, but it is a Latin origin word, and it carried through French, of course, because Latin shifted into all the Romance languages, and then that came into English through England and then to America, where we now have all these crazy spelling rules. I think if we became very dedicated, we could fix the spelling rule issues. It would take a grand effort. I think it's possible. It wouldn't be that incredibly hard. But I think simply explaining that different languages infiltrate and that finding the origin of words, even looking up their origins when you give a definition. Like I remember spelling classes, we had to find definitions of certain words. If you just include the origin of the word, often spelling bees, you'll have them ask for that. It makes more sense in your head to remember, oh, that came from French. So obviously the spelling is going to be full direct.
So with that, are you pro or anti-phonics?
I don't know how one could be pro or anti-phonics. I think phonics is interesting. Phonics itself isn't even pronounced like it's spelled, and that bugs me so much. I really think that learning how to pronounce words in English is important from a young age, but I think that dropping it as you progress is detrimental because you forget certain fun facts and rules even as we progress in our speaking. Like, I've noticed an interesting trend on 12-year-olds, that 12-year-olds have a habit of shortening their words for just a couple weeks. They'll just test it out. Every word becomes shortened. It's very interesting that kind of corresponds with when you're dropping the spelling and you're dropping the phonics, is that they're testing out shortening and making their own words. That's also contributing to a decline, is when we stop teaching, or we stop teaching ourselves or stop teaching children these phonics rules or phonics noises. It's encouraging even more degradation because they're no longer remembering them.
I have a question. Go ahead, Greg. There's some examples that I can think of that you just think of the use of words in a crazy way. One, when we were in Japan, we saw a young lady, and the Japanese are just enamored by English, and she had a shirt on that read "crazy loud football noise," and that was her nod to English, I guess. And I just heard yesterday a story about somebody who had a Chinese tattoo that was in to honor their parents and their gratitude they had for their parents. Mm-hmm. Come to find out, when met by a Chinese man, the word actually meant to wear, like to wear a shirt or wear clothing. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't nearly as honoring to their parents as what they thought it read. My question for you is, what is our allure to the bastardization of these words and just using them wherever and whenever, however? Why do we seem to want that so much in slang and the use of language, or words out of context, if you will, because maybe it sounds better? What's our reasoning for doing that?
Laziness. It's 100% laziness. You can be enamored with a language, and instead of learning that language to its extent, you just pick and choose words that feel good. Or you can love your parents enough to want to honor their culture, but not enough to learn their language. It's very interesting to see the difference between bilingual people and those who just kind of use those words. It's often easier to even understand English if you learn another language, because as we've seen in the Latin classes here at Trinity, when you learn these different charts and you learn the tables and the parts of speech, it makes English easier because you understand how the sentences are lining up and what this phrase means. Because in Latin you have one word for this phrase, but in English you have 3 words for this phrase. It can get confusing in English, but if you know the origin of the Latin, how it all stems from this one part of speech, it makes more sense. I'm sure the same thing is in Spanish and in learning these other languages. But when we find ourselves enamored with other languages, we want to know the language, and we find in ourselves our deep wonder and wanting to understand more about the word, because God is the word, and we want to know more about language and speaking and where we even come from. It's laziness that holds us back, that stops us from pursuing the word. Like, why did he get the tattoo before figuring out what the meaning was? Why did she wear the shirt before understanding what it said?
Thank you.
Did you have a question?
I'll ask my question, then I'll explain my thought. Is there anything we can do about it? That's the question. Because I'm thinking of cultures and evolution of language through cultures. Deanna loves Ireland. You go to England, you go to Scotland, you go to Ireland, all the Germanic languages. And I thought of Louisiana, New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could go down there in New Orleans and probably not understand. And so people groups migrate, gather, and it's just kind of the way we are to a lot of extent. So I feel like your presentation is seeking purity of the language, and I get that, but I also am going, what's the point? Because humanity, history shows that humanity gathers and creates its own. There's probably words that you use here in Trinity as a culture that other people don't understand because you're all used to them.
Right. So I mentioned this in my speech, that it is possible to stop the degradation and to fix our language. We can't go back. We can't backtrack. We can't start at Beowulf and say, nope, we're gonna stay right here. We can't time travel, it's just not how it works. But if you've ever noticed this, I'm sure some of you at least probably have, if you read a really hard book and then you stop to talk to someone, you'll notice that your own vocabulary changes. You'll speak longer sentences, you'll speak harder words. If you sit scrolling on YouTube for hours and you try to hold conversation with someone, your brain goes fuzzy and you can't understand what they're trying to say. It's the same thing that will help us fix our language. If we prioritize good words and good books and things that will edify and beautify our language, then instead of short clipped messages or sending little IDK on your text messages, it's going to be so much easier to pick up the phone and call someone, which will then encourage more speaking, which will spread the edifying of language. And that's how the problem is solved. It is starting individually and spreading the wonder and the need and the want for better language. When you want it, it shows, and others will see it. Even I have noticed, like reading Shakespeare in class, our words get bigger, our words get bolder, our sentences and our discussions are more deep and beautiful. Even if we don't understand a word of what it's saying, we're still trying in our words. So yes, it is fixable, and the way to solve it is to try. It's to avoid that laziness of just plucking words out of thin air and fitting them to suit our purposes. It's actually caring about what you're saying. Especially in English, that's difficult because like I said, we can adjectivize a noun. We can fiddle words to fit our own meanings. And it's really hard to notice because we're so used to it. But a lot of words that we use as nouns, or a lot of words that we use as verbs, are not. But we can make it work. And so if you stop using those, the shoving a round peg into a square hole because it fits, get the square peg and fit the right word where it belongs.
So you're starting to make a believer of me. The way I'm thinking about it is that we should view our language as it's the language that has been given to us.
Yes.
It's the language that God has given to us in this time, in this place. And although we could, argue about, sort of, well, where did it all come from? There's like Swedish words in there and all this stuff. Okay, this is English, and let's try to bring out the best of it.
Exactly.
And in so doing, and we should take just day-to-day enjoyment in that. As we take day-to-day enjoyment in that, however we choose to do that, we will find that our thoughts are edified.
Yes.
Yeah, I like it, Gloria. It's very good.
Yes.
Okay, my question is, so when you're talking about bringing language back to how it used to be, and you said that language and culture, correlate so strongly, do you think that there's a danger in bringing language back that we destroy part of our culture, as it is?
If we destroy the bad part of our language, it follows that we might perhaps destroy the bad part of our culture, which I don't see as a bad thing. If we take out the part of our culture that is lazy and doesn't care, and if we boost the part of our culture that puts in effort and wants to become edified and has these grand thoughts and wants to communicate and share with each other, then yes, there is a possibility that the lazy part will get destroyed.
So follow up on that. Language obviously is kind of artistic, and it made me think about music, and the way that people express themselves in music. And a lot of music, especially that people are making nowadays, uses more slang and other words that they find more relatable and they find as more applicable to their lives and expressing themselves. Do you think that in taking away that language, are we kind of taking away their ability and right to express themselves as they see fit?
They can express themselves however they want. I won't listen. And that's the difference. It's not that I'm going to take away their words. I'm going to use my own words, and they can either choose to listen to my words and hear my words and use them, or they can ignore them. And that's a personal decision. You can continue to use slang, but it's going to continue to be confusing. And even now, I've noticed, ironically enough, some aspects of slang sound a lot like Arthurian and Shakespearean words. Like if you think about the word smacks, like something tastes really good, that's Shakespeare. He has made his resurgence. He has shown back up in slang. I think even the people who speak slang have the inherent desire to speak better. They're searching for it. And the searching is leading them down the wrong path. But if we shine a light, if someone shows the correct way to edify their thoughts and to give them a deeper meaning, it's not going to be the shallow words that they're using. They're going to be able to branch into the deeper words that have the bigger, more edifying thoughts. Does anyone else have any questions? Easy questions are good too. I can define a word. Maybe. Are we good? All right. If we're good, then I can hand it over.